So this is the joint compound, laid about, I would say, a centimetre thick, and I just went over it with my paint scraper just to achieve those waves, evenish waves. This was the first few layers, and this is when I realised that it would take 24 hours each layer to dry. So that was very an eye-opener because of how thick the feathers were. This is coming up the sides. The application, I think, was a little bit rough down here, and I've got more videos, and you can see that it's cracking there because I put too much water with the application. Here is my process. This is sort of like solidifying the putty so that it sticks as one piece, sort of like kneading bread. But this was the best application I came up with. It was time saving and way easier to use the lid rather than a container. Just made it easier for me to scrape off after I just dipped my palette in water, just so it could hopefully come off with a smoother transition from the knife onto the canvas. Sometimes I'd feel it pull, so I would get another palette knife just to sort of assist that smoother transition. But as you can see, this is further up, so I had learned a lot during the other layers, and this was by far the best application that I found. So I'm probably going to go back in with the knife and smooth that out. This is another angle. There's my process again. For the feathers, this was the most time-consuming part for me, I think, throughout the whole thing, because like I said earlier, it was 24 hours at least for all of that to dry. For each layer to dry, I didn't want there to be any mistakes that I found out later. I'm pretty sure it dried a lot faster, but I just want to be sure. So there you can see there's a gap, and how I fixed the gap was I started to manipulate the putty with the palette knife just to try and get it to move around and work with it at the same time. I kept wetting my palette knife just to give it a smoother look. You can see me trying my hardest not to, because other ones I've just pulled straight off the canvas and just mixed it all over again, because it's either falls short or comes off when it's too short. So this process, I realised that using emery boards in a previous project was way more efficient than trying to manipulate sandpaper paper. So it was much easier for me to hold, to move around, and as you can see, there's a sharp edge. I snapped that off because the curved edge, I just kept snapping it down the board as I went along. As I felt like it wasn't doing its job anymore, I'll just clip it off Sony cardboard and use both sides. And I'm very sensory when it came to this, because you can see my hands running over it to see if I achieved the roundness that I wanted, or to see if I could get rid of what I saw, the sharp points that I saw. And this is the silicone mold that I got off Temu. It's cut in half actually, because my dog got a hold of it and chewed some of it up. There's a sample there on the right. So I wait for that part to dry about, I would say, a couple of hours. Give it a couple of hours to dry nicely, so that to ensure that the putty doesn't come back onto the silicone mold. So you see me pressing it down to imprint the putty, just to make sure that I've got good coverage, just lightly pressing, not too hard. Getting into all those corners and just being efficient, I think, here. What I did notice with the other one was a little bit of pullback. I'm sure you saw. You could see just in the right hand side, just a little bit of sharpness there. That was from the silicone mold pulling at the putty. So here's the reveal, and it looks like it's going good. Then I started to feel a pull, so I just sort of tried to make the least, and clearly I didn't wait long enough for it to dry, so that was a learning curve too. Here is me applying water, because I found that when I do try and cover a much bigger area, I need there to be a foundation. I needed to lay a foundation first, just to ensure that it doesn't move off the out of place, so it sticks together. And there goes my first coat of primer, just priming just to see what that looks like. And there was a lot of colour going on here. I decided to experiment with making browns, and the browns that I had. Again, the application, because I took too long recording the other video and it dried out. So this is the same application as the above, the top, the columns that you see above that. This is exactly the application, except I used my paint scraper to assist in getting those sharper edges on the sides there, and just a longer palette knife just to achieve the nice crisp corners. So here, this is like, I would say, covering a cake. I want to know what that's like, because I'm a cook, I'm not a baker. But yeah, that was pretty much what it was like. So now you'll see that I've laid a foundation that's okay. So I'm going in with applying with the paint scraper actually, to sort of try and achieve more coverage, just to spread it out, and applying pressure at the same time to make sure that I don't leave any gaps or there's no surprising cracks. When it dries up, just to ensure, yeah, it doesn't really matter as long as I've got it on there, I think. And yeah, like I said, applying the pressure. Yes, those corners were a little bit tricky. I had to maneuver around those, and just always making sure that my paint scraper was clean enough to go back in with an application. And here's me carrying on using the palette knife just to sort of make sure I'm not going beyond my means, just to lay that foundation across the whole thing over there. And this was the same process as the rest of the belt. I just didn't really record it. I forgot to record it. But this was the exact same process. Just smoothing it out, trying to put pressure on it just to make sure that it's safe to go ahead with the thicker application on top. Yep, just filling in some gaps there. Making sure that it's good coverage, especially the corners. I realised that a lot of the corners during my application process were a little bit missing, because that's usually where I'd go to sweep off excess and things like that, and sometimes it would come off on the back of my palette knife. Yeah, so here's me trying to smooth it over like a cake, like how you would ice a cake. Pretty much, just a lot rougher, just to try and reinforce that it'll stick and it's not just all stuck on there. I knew with the other application of the columns and directly below was the Aromatawai, so I knew it was going to be a tight squeeze and I'd have to be pretty precise if I didn't want any overhang or anything like that. And here's the rough application before I go in again with the palette knife to smooth it all out. And here is that process. I got a bigger one just to sort of cover the bigger area, and again just manipulating that around. I didn't leave it to dry at any sort of amount of time, and you can see that it's pretty lumpy, which is fine. It ends up sorting itself out anyway. I realized that I was picking up a lot, so I started to wet the underside of the palette knife too, to sort of make it glide a lot easier. And I was a little bit worried that it might crack, but in the end it didn't really crack. Yep, and that's me just shaping it. And this is what I mean by the takeoff. When I go to smooth it out and I'm trying to make it smooth, a lot just comes off. All of that excess just comes off naturally. So I knew that I'd need a different technique to sort of get this to stay on there. And to get that corner, that was really, really difficult. And then I went in, when I was satisfied enough, I went in with my paintbrush and a little bit of water applied to it just to see if I could get it down, the lumpy parts down, and to make it look a little bit more even.